So some of you more internationally affluent viewers, or just plain Canadian viewers, should be aware of the fact that the French-speaking province of Quebec has been seeking some independence for a while now. But why is that? I mean, Louisiana was French, but they have no interest in sovereignty. Well, if you look at Quebec's history, you can see why the spirit of freedom will never die. Samuel de Champlain landed on the banks of the St. Lawrence River in 1608 and founded what we know of today as Quebec. Slowly but surely, the French colony would prosper and grow due to the fur trade. The English were constantly eyeing New France and would occasionally invade it. However, Quebec would remain under the French crown until the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War as we call it in the States. New France, as it was called at the time, did actually pretty well, all things considered. But the lack of support from Old France meant that they couldn't hold back the English for very long. When France lost in 1763, she gave all of her mainland North American territories to Spain and Britain. With new management came new laws that openly discriminated against the French colonists. After the Revolutionary War, things just got worse. Loyalists from the south fled north, which gave the crown an excuse to chop up New France into French and English-speaking territories. The Quebecois would resist their English overlords, but wouldn't have a very strong rebellion until 1838. A political party, known as the Parti Canadien, rose up Canadian politics and encouraged an armed rebellion. When Quebecois rose up, the Catholic Church stepped in to calm everyone down. They didn't believe that the French Canadians could defeat their British overlords, and instead encouraged everyone to give up their resistance. After the failed resistance, Britain got very hard on the French Canadians. They set up schools to assimilate the youth, they deported people to Australia, they suppressed the French language, they enticed British citizens to settle in the province, and they made the provincial government of Canada far more Anglo-centric. All these efforts diluted the French culture in major metropolitan areas such as Montreal and Quebec City. It wasn't until the Quiet Revolution in the 1960s that things began to change for the French Canadians. They passed laws to preserve and strengthen the French culture. Businesses and government made French first and English second, if they even wanted to have English at all. The movement was so strong, in fact, that Quebec had an independence referendum twice. Once in 1980 and another in 1995. This was something that was unheard of in the previous 250 years of Anglo-centric domination. Alright, now that we have some brief history, let's get back to the main point. What if Quebec became an independent state? Quebec is 1.5 million square kilometers, or about 600 square miles. This would put it behind Mongolia as the 20th largest nation in the world. The population of Quebec is about 8.25 million, so it would replace Switzerland as the 97th most populous country. It has a lot of natural resources, as it had a lot of developed industries, such as video games, which makes for a more stable economy. A lot of bigger businesses are French already, so a lot of them should remain in this new country. The English ones, however, might not. Depending on the amount of nationalism, English may be openly discriminated against and discourage English businesses from remaining there. However, I don't think the Quebecois would resist one of the wealthiest languages in the world for very long. All in all, Quebec looks like it has a potential to be a strong and stable country, so the real threat would be the period immediately after the Canadian secession. For starters, what currency would they use? If they made their own, that would guarantee a crippling depression. They could hang on to the Canadian dollar or even jump ship to the American one, but that would give up control of their economy. And you know, the point of freedom is freedom. This would also bring up issues like debt, taxes, and infrastructure, because they wouldn't be getting any more money from Ottawa. But the reduced taxes would only be for Quebec, so it would depend on the efficiency of the government to preserve the social welfare programs. What about their international relations? We can assume they got their independence from a fair referendum and not some bloody war, so the animosity between Canada and them wouldn't be that bad. However, I don't think Canada would be very interested in being friends with Quebec. I'd imagine Canada would have some very passive-aggressive things to say, like, "You wanted to share economic policies together? I thought you wanted to have less to do with me. Huh, defense policies? Why don't you go shack up with America? I mean, he's got a bigger military than me anyway, right?" Which leads to the actual relationship to America, which I think would be just as warm as before. The Yanks have seemed to be backing away from complete global domination and more to being everyone's best friend at the bar. Just ask Cuba. I think the only real change outside of the North American sphere would be the close bond with the EU and the even closer bond with France. France also has this big fear of losing their culture, and suddenly a new French-speaking trade partner with millions of people and no horrible dictatorships would be irresistible to France. As a matter of fact, this could be a really good angle for Quebec. It's already seen as the most European place in North America, so why not make it as big a partner to the EU as it would to the United States? But there's still a few more questions to answer about this. For what about the First Nations of Quebec? They hold huge parts of land, and the Quebecois government would really have to sell them on keeping them in the Union. And how would citizenship and visas work? Would they honor contracts set by the Canadian government or force everyone to start over again? So the real question boils down to preserving the French-Canadian culture, which at this time is actually doing pretty well. Long gone are the discriminatory practices, and now that Anglo-Canadians pretty much embrace the French-Canadians, I mean the Canadian government is actually French-English bilingual. To add to that, Quebec would be entering a world already dominated by English, so they would have to actively preserve their culture, which is something they're doing right now. Either way, Quebec has a prosperous future with or without Canada. And since there is no major threat to the people there, the little details are what the French-Canadians are really going to have to think about during the next referendum.